Greetings. My name is Al Batinga, and we're excited to talk about a class, give you an overview of a class called Achieving Results Through Effective Communication. My name is Al Batinga, and my business partner on this is Deanna Mendeville, and we're with CCS Learning Academy. So let's talk about some of the topics. So you can see here, this is us, CCS Learning Academy, and we're excited to bring this presentation to you. And so let's talk about some of the objectives. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to build this from the ground up, right? So what is communication? And by the way, our classes are very interactive. We involve everybody in the class. And being this is a communication skills class, we obviously want to practice, drill, and rehearse. So there are many definitions to communication. So what we want to do is get the foundation, get the basis, and then we can tweak it to what we need to. And so we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the model for communication, right? And we have a message and we have a receiver, and there's a lot of things in between there that we discuss. And so you can start to see things like noise. You can start to see things about barriers, which we'll talk about, that hold back the level 10 communication. Level 10 being the highest level of communication, which we all strive for. And so we'll talk about why communication is important. And most of you have seen that radio station called WIIFM, What's in It for Me, right? All of you who come to class, all of you on a regular basis, you're looking at how can this help me so I can help others? What is the benefit for me? And so this class is the same concept. We like to call it workshop, by the way, because we are very interactive, like I mentioned. What's in it for me? And so we want to discuss that as an exercise with the class. And then we also want to talk about what traits and tools we need to communicate at the highest level. And you probably think, okay, what would that be? And one of the most important ones are active listening, right? Is the active listening concept. And active listening is not just listening hard. You want a full body listening. There's tips and tricks and shortcuts that we talk about in the class to listen at a greater level. Most listeners are average, meaning they are okay. They listen to a certain level. In this class, we want to give you tips, tricks, and shortcuts to listen at the higher levels so that you can create great communication as we go along. We also want to talk about emotional intelligence. And so if you think about emotional intelligence in the concept of communication, you have the concept of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And so what is that but communication? So we talk about that concept too, and we get into what that is all about. And then we, as I mentioned, we want to talk about what stops us from communicating at the highest levels. We got these things called cell phones. We've got texting. We've got voicemail. We've got a whole bunch of different communications that we didn't have 20 years ago. And so that's one of them, right? The fact that most of us are overburdened. We have so many emails, so many texts. We have so many projects that can stop us. And one of the things I want to warn you against, by the way, is you get into a habit of semi-listening, of being in a conversation at a certain level. And what happens about that we want to talk about in class is that when you want to listen, it's hard to do it because you've created what is called a habit, right? All of us have seen that, felt that we do something repeatedly, all of a sudden we lose the ability to do it at the levels that we need to. And so we also want to talk about identified methods of communication. When is it better to do face-to-face rather than email or texting or a memo or written communications, right? I mean, there's a plethora of communications now that we can utilize. And we also want to talk about what's the barriers, what stops us, right? We talked about that briefly earlier. What stops us from level 10 communication? And that's always a good question to ask. What stops me from communicating at the highest levels? Sometimes it's because I don't use the language that's common to my audience. Sometimes I don't even know my audience, right? There's a lot of things that we can discuss in there that will help. And then we have a simple method that we use. It's called the STAR method. And it stands for situation, task, action, and results. So if you think about that for a moment and you say, that's interesting. So what is the current situation? What are the tasks or tasks I need to do? What are the action? And do I get the result? So it's just a very simplistic way, but yet it is very effective. And we also talk about best practice in verbal, vocal, visual, written communications, right? There's many modes that you can communicate across, especially on the face-to-face. If you think about what I just said, verbal, vocal, visual, that concept right there, right? It's how we say the message. There's a lot of credence to that, how we emphasize words, what words do we emphasize? Do we pause inside of our sentences and paragraphs? And what does that impact present? So we talk about best practices in communication. And we also, what we want to do at the end of the workshop is we want to create a plan to put our wisdom, our knowledge into use. And it's very important for that to happen, right? We want to actuate the wisdom, actuate the knowledge as we move forward. So at the end of all of our workshops, so again, I'm Al Batenga, Deanna Mendeville, and we're with CCS Academy. And what we do is we teach, educate, train, and coach through workshops, business skills. And there's several other classes we want you to look after. We've got several videos here, and we're growing that video base as we speak. And so I'm going to do one module here. We talk about best practices in the virtual venue, right? Especially when you talk about communication. And so I'm just going to give you one short module that you can get the flavor of what we discuss. Now, when we do our class, it's going to be a lot more interactive. I'm just doing all the talking. In our class, we definitely encourage and we support and we push people to give their opinions and their thoughts, and let's trade ideas in these classes. So one is you're going to create a systematic approach to checking for microphone and camera setup. So sometimes you go into virtual environments and we can't get a mic working, or we can't get the speakers working. And so we want to ensure that before you come on to this, we have instructions, or we have practiced, or we do this on a regular basis. And so you have the mic and the camera concept set up. We want to understand, as I mentioned, how to change speakers, how to change the microphone, how to change the camera. So for instance, I have two cameras, right? I have one on the laptop. I have one that you're looking at right now. I have three speakers, right? I have a speaker. I also have a internal to a monitor, as well as on my laptop. And so what we want to do is we want to figure out, sometimes some software doesn't utilize maybe a secondary speaker. So you need to switch it back to the primary, depending on the software, depending on the situation, depending on the venue that you're using. And so from a best practices for a virtual venue, we want to ensure we know and do that, utilize that, and we know how to change things. We also always want to encourage cameras, right? Cameras actually connect us. I've taught classes where there's no cameras on. I can tell you it's hard to connect. And so when you do virtual communications, when you do virtual venues, we encourage the use of cameras. Now, sometimes people don't have a camera, or sometimes they're in a place where cameras don't necessarily work right, or maybe the internet is weaker and the camera takes up some bandwidth. So there are exceptions, but by and large, we encourage camera use. And so you also want to do an icebreaker just to connect everybody. It could be introductions. It could be a game. You could gamify it. You could, there's a bunch of different things that you can do inside of a virtual communication session to just get everybody connected. And then you want to maximize engagement by involving all. Now, one of the ways we do that is we do breakouts. And so you go on a breakout. So if there's 10 people, we might have 3 groups of 3 and 1 group of 4, right? To get, or 2 groups of 3 and 1 group of 4 to encompass all people in there. And we encourage inside that small group for everybody to speak, for everybody to trade ideas, right? You're going to learn a lot from each other inside of our training, inside of our workshop venues. And sometimes you have to over-accentuate, over-verbally and paraverbally being tone, speed, pauses, and the like, right, on your verbal side of this to get the same impact, because we're not face-to-face. And so sometimes subtle movements, subtle hand motions don't connect online simply because they're not caught. So again, because we're online, and we want to be clear and exacting on all our goals and objectives on any and all online videos. And we want to be aware of the group dynamics and adjust as needed to ensure success. So that's just one quick module from that overall perspective. So again, we are CCS Learning Academy. I'm Al Batinga. Deanna Mendeville works with me too. And we're teaching right now the small module on achieving results through effective communication. So we would be glad and excited to have you join us for our next class. Thank you.